Today I'm going to be talking about a Saxony versus Crimea matchup. And these kinds of matchups are interesting in general because Crimea cannot Wayfare or Riverwalk into Saxony's base. And it's the only matchup where Crimea can't eventually reach you. I am Saxony Engineering. He's Crimea Industrial, and there's a 15 coin bid. And so I start off with pretty normal way to open, which is trade oil, produce, move, and then I alternate between producing and trading. My objectives are wolfing the sheep and balanced workforce, both of which are a little bit awkward. They're not really the objectives you want to see. You want to see movement objectives most likely. Now, both are doable, but they're going to be a little bit tricky. This is all pretty normal stuff so far. First thing that we're really going to talk about is when I get to my first encounter. And I find a building on this encounter, which is really nice. Because now that saves some time. I don't have to go to Togawa's mountain encounter and then pivot from there to the factory. Now I can just go straight to the factory. So he goes a pretty normal 8-worker strategy. This is what I like to play in Crimea Industrial as well. Crimea deploys their speed mech. We're going to produce and trade to underpass and then immediately go to the factory. So it's time for Crimea's encounter. He sets up to be able to produce enough food and metal, and then what we eventually see is him trading for wood and then moving, which is a really nice Crimea Industrial engine. And there's a couple of decent options here. They could either go 2 metal and a popularity, or they could go $3 to enlist the recruit. You just definitely want to make sure to not go the last option, because then you're going to be really unpopular and your workers are going to revolt / not be able to produce. So they will go ahead and enlist, which makes sense because that's another turn they don't have to spend trading. They also are going to get the coins back from the coin enlist, including right now because we're deploying. So we deploy underpass. Crimea produces a Crimea is going to deploy Riverwalk. Here, I'm going to go ahead and move and block Crimea's tunnel. And then I'm going to set up the factory movement. So the purpose in blocking Crimea's tunnel is if they go Riverwalk right away, which he did, then he's not really incentivized to combat me there because I can come back and hit him, and you don't want to feed free combats to Saxony early. So the goal is just to stall him long enough so that he develops Scout, and then I move away. So let's take a look at our factory cards. We have a popularity option if we want to go for the long game. We have 2 coins for a building and popularity, and we have 2 different resources for an upgrade or enlist. Because we're still stuck on 3 workers, and it's not that easy for Saxony to get 2 different resources, then third one's not really that interesting for us, and I think the first one is just too slow. So we're going to go with the second option, which pushes us towards bottom row actions and does give us some popularity, so tier 2 is not out of the question. And we can note that the building bonus is buildings adjacent to encounters, so we'll even be able to pick up 2 easy points by building a building right away on our mountain. So we do that, and then we go to the encounter. And our choice is pretty simple. We don't have the money to pay for option 2, we don't have the popularity to pay for option 3, so we take option 1. So that's going to round me out nicely as far as getting a few more upgrades. Crimea produces again. And they deploy their scary scout mech. So it's time for me to move. So I'm going to move my mountain mech to Togawa's mountain encounter so that I can get my character there. I'm going to move my 2 workers to the tundra so that I can, number 1, get a couple upgrades because I did pick up 2 oil at the last encounter, and number 2, keep options open for balanced workforce because at this point I only have 3 workers, so if I can get lucky and get a couple enlists, then I can keep that option alive as well. So what's nice about this encounter is whenever Crimea is not on a mine or on a tunnel, then these squares, the Tagawa Mountain encounter, the Rustfiat oil encounter, these squares are not accessible until he either gets a factory card or he moves onto a mine or a tunnel. So we see our encounter, and we are very thankful to see food. So I'm looking at either option 1 or option 2. Option 1, of course, we don't have to pay for it, and we also get some popularity. The problem is we're not going to be able to enlist right away. We would have to upgrade that down to 2. And so I go ahead and go for option 2 just to get a bit of tempo. We get closer to balanced workforce. We get an enlist, which will give us some coins back. So we are pretty short on coins, so I'm going to go for the coin enlist. And I also take the popularity bonus just in case we find a 3 popularity option at the next encounter that we want to take advantage of. All right, and Crimea moves adjacent to the factory, which is pretty typical to make sure that they don't get sent home so easily. What that does mean is that they're not going to be able to hit us until they get that factory card. So now we can map out the middle game. So in an ideal world, we'd be able to get 2 upgrades, upgrading Deploy to only costing 2 metal, and upgrading Enlist to only costing 2 food. And then since we would have also produced 4 metal, then at that point we'd be able to trade into food and deploy while moving and enlisting. However, Crimea, if they really want to, can reach us in 3 turns. They can say produce deploy, and then move, and then get their factory move. So if that's the case, we're going to have to be a little bit less efficient to make sure that we don't give up a combat where they can start hitting us over and over again and scout all of our cards. So this is an example of a sequence that might happen if Crimea moves more quickly to the factory. So for now, we'll follow our sequence. We'll produce an upgrade. Don't have to deviate from that just yet. Crimea produces again. Crimea is going to deploy their Wayfair mech, so once they get that factory card, they will be able to go pretty much anywhere on the map, except for our base. And they turn in monopolize the market. Ideally, they would like to hold on to that, but they're going to want to trade for their last enlist, and so they're going to go below 9 food. So that could be an opportunity for us to attack into them later and give up combat stars to end the game if we're ahead on points. And currently, we're about tied on points, and they have 3 stars, so that's kind of encouraging. So I'm going to continue on with my sequence, just factory card moving, and I'm going to bring a worker over to the mountain because we've used up the 3 building spots on our base. So now if I want to factory card in a later turn, then I have the flexibility where I can do that. Not so concerned about the building bonus, just because I think it's more important to get the bottom row actions completed. So we're going to produce, get our last upgrade, and at this point, because Crimea has bolstered and they've delayed moving to the factory, then we can get our ideal setup, where we're going to trade for a mech, we're going to trade food, and then be able to move and enlist in the same turn. So Crimea finishes all their enlists. And just to reiterate, with Crimea delaying the move to the factory for efficiency, we can do the same and adopt our more efficient sequence. So it's important that we match efficiency in this case. We're not just trying to be greedy at all costs. We're looking and paying close attention to what they do, and then based on that, we are adapting our setup and our build order based on what they do. One more thing that I think is important to talk about is I deployed this mech back to the 2 workers. That makes sense for a couple reasons. One of them is so that if I want to then move them onto the village so I can start producing and get more workers out after I get balanced workforce, then I have the flexibility to do that. But also, I want to be careful not to have more than 3 mechs on a space that Crimea can reach, because otherwise I can't move all 3 of them away. I would have to leave a mech behind, which is a potential combat that I'd be giving up. So I want to keep a nice group of 3 mechs that I can move on a move action. So here we go. Crimea moves to the factory, gets a little bit of spread. Not going to be producing again. They go ahead and choose that factory card that lets them enlist and upgrade. So of course they finish their enlists, but they can get those upgrades. And also usually this kind of card is a lot better for Crimea when they can spend one of their combat cards as the other odd resource. And you can see they have a pile of food still left over. And we find an enlist, so that's really, really helpful for us. We're actually going to be able to complete balanced workforce this turn and be at 3 enlists, so that's really good. Looking at 3 bottom row action stars, going to get deploy, enlist, and build. So I'm feeling pretty good about this now. I'm up to 7 combat cards. I do have a 5, which they could steal, but it's only 1 in 7 for them to do that. So we can pretty successfully fend off a factory card move attack against me. They can only throw a max of 10, being at 5 power, throwing combat card of 5. So even if they steal my 5, I can throw 3 threes and 2 power and still be okay. If I encounter 16, they don't not really that interested in options 1 or 3. They already have all of their enlists. So because they have their factory card that allows them to get upgrades and they already stopped for another upgrade, option 2 is definitely the correct play, and that's what they do. They're going to get ready to upgrade again. At this point, I'm looking at my remaining stars. So I'm going to get my Enlist star, I'm going to get my Mech star. That'll still only put me at 4. I can fairly reasonably get 1 combat star, but then that leaves 1 more star for me to get. So now I'm looking at my other objective, Wolf Among the Sheep, and I'm noticing it's a little bit inefficient to get that with where I'm at currently. I don't really have workers to produce. I would basically have to give up an entire turn to produce and not spend it on an upgrade. So what I decide to do is I take this opportunity with Crimea just having used their factory card to grab another encounter for myself. And I still have enough safety to where I can move all 3 mechs that are out there in range of Crimea back to my home base if need be. And I take a gamble that I'll be able to find the resources. And it pays off. I find 2 food and 2 oil. Really, really nice encounter. I didn't know the likelihood that I would find this in the game, but looking at it afterwards, it turns out I actually had a pretty high chance of finding 3 or more resources. 29 out of the 42 encounters total have 3 or more resources. We've already seen a ratio of about 2 to 1 used previously that we looked into, and so about a 70% chance to find 3 or more resources. So it's a pretty high likelihood that I would find what I needed here. So he does some moving around. He finds a nice encounter as well. This gets him another upgrade towards the upgrade star, which is his win condition. His last star is going to be build, so he's going to have 3 bottom, actually at that point 4 bottom row actions. Doesn't need the food, but the upgrade is great. At this point, he is 4 upgrades away before getting this encounter. So then he's going to be at 3 and then 2 with his factory move, and then 1 with the oil he found. So he's very, very quickly moving towards the upgrade star. So I can't dally too long. And he discards a 4. So I know his last combat card is either a 4 or 5. So now I need to move because otherwise he's going to be able to 1v1 me and steal all my resources on the forest because he just built his mine. So now he can reach me within 3 moves. So I need to move this turn, which I do. I move back to my base, and I just leave Nordic space at this point. I want to be able to have flexibility. I don't want to have to move if he comes and attacks me. And then I do not turn in this enlist because I need to turn in Wolf. And that'll give me flexibility to end on a move enlist on a later turn. So he upgrades again, putting him at 4 upgrades. I'm going to go ahead and trade for my last mech. Because I found metal at that last encounter, I'm able to trade for popularity and go into tier 2 popularity, which is really nice. And I would say this kind of marks for me the transition into the end game. Right away, I'm actually looking at attacking him on the factory this next turn. So I am threatening to move to the factory and then 2v1 him on the factory. And I've calculated that using the counting method, which is you count the number of stars you have, the number of territories, and the number of resource pairs, and you subtract that many points from your score. That's if you're dropping, and then if you're going up a popularity tier, you can do the same thing in reverse. So in this case, I'm going to be losing 10 points if I combat him on the factory, because I have 4 stars, I have 4 territories, and I have 2 pairs of 2 resources. However, that's still enough to win. So my opponent responds to this by moving his mechs away. He also vacates the mountain because I would be able to dive him on that mountain there. And he also blocks any factory card move hitting his mechs and planting his base by blocking it with a worker on that forest. Okay, so what do I do now? So looking at our earlier calculation, this no longer applies because we're not able to end on a combat. So what's actually going to happen is we get to 57 points, and then he's going to be able to come back on a factory move and combat us on the mountain adjacent to the factory, and then win the game by 1 point. So instead, we do a little airdrop maneuver where we drop this worker right next to the factory and then retreat back to our base. And hopefully we're going to be able to use that worker to attack the factory next turn. So What happens if Crimea factory moves to spread and kicks our worker? Honestly, I had miscalculated in the game. For some reason I had thought that even if he did that, then I'd be able to dive into him, but I did not calculate that properly, and that's not an option. I would lose if he put his workers here in these three spaces. And so we would probably just have to trade for 2 popularity, maybe move our workers to a village so that we can produce, but I think at that point we would lose this game because Crimea is inching closer and closer to the upgrade star every turn. That wouldn't be even that close. But luckily he trades for 2 oil, gets another enlist for another combat card. So because he doesn't do that, I'm able to take the factory, and I'm once again in a really good position. And then I turn in the enlist here to keep the option of winning next turn. And as part of this, I did have to calculate what happens if he factory moves 1, 2, 3 and hits me on the factory, because now I have enlisted, so I'm at 5 stars myself, so he can dive me. So now I have to be calculating what happens if he dives me. But it's not really that close. He will pick up a couple territories, but I just have too many points. By holding the factory, I would get even more points from the combat, so I'm pretty secure there at the moment. So he moves, shields himself on the adjacent tunnels, and kicks the mountain worker, possibly preparing to move and dive me next turn. So I need to spread, so I'm going to factory move. And what I decide to do is I pay 2 coins for 1 popularity, even though I don't have any buildings left, so that I can threaten a dive without losing tier 2 if I win this combat. And it's enough even on losing 2 coins from the factory card. And then he cracks and leaves me open a combat, and I jump on it, and I'm able to successfully dive him and win the game. And that's the game. As a reminder, here's some helpful encounter ratios and the counting method. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you want to see more games like this, comment and let me know. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.